Evening News with Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. President Johnson announced today that he will not now send the Senate another nomination for Chief Justice. The president said the country will be better served if Chief Justice Warren remains on the court until, in the president's words, reason and fairness prevail. ABC's White House correspondent Bill Gill says Mr. Johnson believes that another battle in the Senate, similar to the one over the nomination of Mr. Fortas, would diminish the prestige not only of the Supreme Court, but of the presidency as well. Republicans in the Senate today killed a bill which would have authorized television debates among Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and George Wallace. The bill, passed by the House yesterday, would have suspended the equal time provisions in the communications law. Threatened by a Republican filibuster led by Senator Dirksen, Majority Leader Mike Mansfield said he was forced to set aside the bill indefinitely. With Congress rushing toward adjournment, there is now no chance for passage this session, and thus it appears there will be no debates involving the three major candidates for the presidency. Senator Edmund Muskie, the Democratic vice presidential nominee, was campaigning in New Jersey when he learned of the Senate's action.
Senator Mansfield, the majority leader, has called off any further consideration of that legislation which would make possible debates by the presidential candidates because the Republican leader, Senator Dirksen, threatened to filibuster to kill the bill unless Mansfield called it off. Imagine the Senate leader of one of our great political parties using the right of unlimited debate in the Senate to cut off debate in the countryside among the presidential candidates of our country. Can you imagine that? Debate is the exclusive property of the Senate, he says. The country isn't entitled to it. I hope you make it clear to Mr. Nixon, to Senator Dirksen, to every man of little faith in the democratic process, that you're entitled to hear Nixon debating Humphrey, Humphrey debating Wallace.
Senator Dirksen noted today that Democrats blocked similar legislation in 1964, which would have provided for debates between Barry Goldwater and President Johnson. And Dirksen said today, if it was fish then, it shouldn't be foul now. Tonight, for the first time in the campaign, President Johnson makes a political speech for Vice President Humphrey. That story in a moment.
Well, I didn't think it was anything. Just some dry, flaky skin.
What could it be? Just a scaly patch.
I don't know what it is. A persistent itch.
These could be symptoms of the heartbreak of psoriasis. So if you have dry, flaky skin, scaly patches, persistent itch, ask your doctor. Ask about Tegrin, the new medicated formula that guarantees three-way relief from the itching and scaling of psoriasis or money back.
No more itch thanks to Tegrin.
Tegrin removed those ugly scales fast.
I keep using Tegrin. It helps keep scales from coming back.
Try new Tegrin. It's guaranteed. Now another new product from Tegrin. New Tegrin medicated shampoo, especially formulated to wash away loose psoriasis scales. Leaves hair and scalp cleaner and healthier looking. New Tegrin medicated shampoo.
President Johnson has said on a number of occasions that he wants Vice President Humphrey to win the election. But tonight, for the first time, Mr. Johnson makes a political speech on Humphrey's behalf. The president couples his support for the vice president with attacks on Richard Nixon and George Wallace. Here are some excerpts from the president's speech.
On the one hand, there are harsh political voices in the air that seek to divide our people and to set them against each other in mutual fear and suspicion. The man who stood at the schoolhouse door defying the law is now pretending to be the apostle of order. I don't believe many Americans will be fooled by that pose, and neither will they agree with Mr. Wallace when he says there's not a dime's worth of difference between Mr. Nixon and Vice President Humphrey, because the people know the record of both of these candidates. They know that Nixon is the one who cast the tie-breaking vote that killed aid to education back when he was vice president. They know that Nixon is the one who said that Medicare would do more harm than good. And they know that Nixon is the one who speaks for the Republican Party, Mr. Nixon's Republican Party, that always opposes so much vital and progressive legislation. I deeply regret that we have thus far been unable to bring the Vietnam conflict to an end, thus far unable to achieve an honorable settlement of a war that we did not invite, but from which we could not run. I am determined that the next administration will find America, South Vietnam, and our allies in a strong position on the battlefield. And I look forward to the day when Hubert Humphrey will assume the splendid misery, the burdens, and the magnificent opportunities of President of the United States.
In Evansville, Indiana today, George Wallace said he will send his vice presidential running mate, General Curtis LeMay, on a 4-day fact-finding mission to Vietnam. Wallace said he would then make a report to the American people after General LeMay returns from Vietnam. LeMay's trip is scheduled to begin next Tuesday. Aboard his campaign plane today, Wallace gave this exclusive interview to ABC's Tom Gerald. Well, I'm sorry we don't seem to be able to summon up that interview that Tom Gerald had on the plane today with Governor Wallace. He asked the governor what he would do if General LeMay returned from Vietnam and advised using nuclear weapons to end the war. Wallace emphasized that just because General LeMay talked about nuclear weapons did not mean they would be used. He said General LeMay believes the war can be won with conventional weapons. Both he and General LeMay believe the use of nuclear weapons is, as Mr. Wallace put it, out of the question in Vietnam. ABC's Howard K. Smith has some thoughts on George Wallace and another politician who seems to prefer going his own way. Howard?
The year 1968 has produced two political miracle men, figures uninfluential when the year began, but who've had an almost historic impact as the year progressed. One is George Wallace, the little man with only a regional appeal, who parlayed one stock speech and a campaign promise to run over prone anarchists in his automobile, if elected, into a mass political party that could change the shape of American politics. Richard Nixon says that Wallace has now peaked and is in decline, but we'll find out about that on election night. The other miracle man of the year is Eugene McCarthy, a very attractive personality, but an unimpressive senator who nevertheless broke his own party's president and almost broke up its convention. We don't know when McCarthy peaked, but this week there have been signs that he is now headed downhill. Clean Gene, the hero of youth, has been almost as immune from press criticism this year as a Kennedy is. But now disillusionment seems to have begun. The liberal columnist Joseph Kraft the other day called him a self-centered man who utters wisecracks and not policies. Now today, Herb Locke, the great liberal cartoonist, depicts him this way: a somewhat overage love child, sniffing funny blossoms, going nowhere in particular, feet firmly off the ground. No McCarthy opponent has ever savaged him quite as strongly as that. Not long ago, when columnist Walter Lippmann left Washington, McCarthy moved into Lippmann's home. There may have been political contagion in the House. The other day, Lippmann surprised his liberal friends by endorsing Nixon for president. This week, whether he realized it or not, McCarthy almost did the same thing, announcing he would not support his party's candidate. There are enough Democrats who like McCarthy all right, but oppose Nixon more to make that action probably the end of the McCarthy phenomenon. This is Howard K. Smith in Washington.
In a moment, a further look at the presidential campaign today and a report on Mrs. Humphrey.
Fall. Vacations are over. Everybody seems to huddle a little closer, kind of getting out of the cold. The family gets together. Grandma cooks. Everybody laughs. Great days. Oh, maybe a little spilled gravy, a couple of arguments. But mostly wonderful moments. And if you've got a Polaroid color pack camera, at the end of the day, you're left with even more than memories. It's under $50. That's quite a buy.
In Moline, Illinois today, Richard Nixon promised the strongest finish in American political history. He acknowledged his lead in the national opinion polls, but Mr. Nixon said, "We're not taking anything for granted." Vice President Humphrey campaigned in New York City today. A large crowd listened to him on Wall Street. There was some heckling from anti-war demonstrators and backers of George Wallace. Humphrey brushed aside the interruptions and said, "This election is not going to be decided by the noisy left or by the rude and radical right." Last night, we presented a report on Mrs. Richard Nixon and her role in her husband's campaign. Tonight, ABC's Marlene Sanders reports on Mrs. Hubert Humphrey.
Humphrey certainly has fun herself in a daily schedule that most candidates would consider plain hard work.
Humphrey must be formed. Mrs. Humphrey will be here in just a few moments.
She began as a timid campaigner back in 1943. Today, confident is the word for the wife of the vice president. She enjoys the crowds, relishes their enthusiasm, and plunges into the exhausting routine of campaigning with exuberance. No day of campaigning would be complete without tasting a variety of foods. Mrs. Humphrey, do you like the ethnic eating circuit?
I love it. I'm really hungry. When you turn the cameras off, then I'll eat it.
Campaigning is more than shaking hands and eating pizza. Mrs. Humphrey holds frequent press conferences. She's often asked how she feels about those who heckle her husband.
I think it's very frustrating because I think they seem to me to be wasting a lot of youth and enthusiasm and not particularly making very good points. I think enough said on the subject.
Muriel Humphrey is warm and comfortable with children. She likes them all, and the feeling is mutual.
Do I get a kiss from you?
Are you terribly tired after a day like the one you put in?
Well, I'm not really now. I had a little chance to refresh and put some new makeup on, comb hair again, and I think a little supper, and then we'll be fine.
Do you worry about subjecting yourself to questioning, particularly on the rather tough political issues that do come up from time to time?
I think it's important, though, that people know what a wife's views are about the serious problems of the world and of the states and the local problems. And I've had a lot of experience, and I almost really owe it to people to share my views with them.
No matter what the polls may say, Muriel Humphrey says she senses a swing by voters to her husband, and she's doing her best to make things turn out that way. This is Marlene Sanders, ABC News.
ABC guest commentator Maria Manis offers these thoughts on two ladies, one of whom could become the first lady.
What is the ideal president's wife? She must, of course, be the solace and comfort of the president, ever supporting, ever smiling. She must be attractive, though not alluring. She should be a good homemaker and a loving mother. She should be intelligent, but not intellectual. Nothing seems to disturb the American electorate more than a woman of independent thought or strong personality. Two marked exceptions to these ideals were, of course, Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt, long derided by many, and Mrs. John F. Kennedy, long adulated by many. But for most, the First Lady should be the wife next door, only luckier. American as apple pie, beyond suspicion, and preferably middle rather than upper class. You might even say that she was a soap opera matron brought to life and glory. Those who have seen on this program the two short films of Mrs. Nixon and Mrs. Humphrey campaigning might agree that they both fit this picture admirably. Attractive, alert, wholly loyal to their men. But you might also have detected a difference. Mrs. Nixon is playing her companion role charmingly, but more like an actress who has memorized a script than a woman with words of her own. With Mrs. Humphrey, on the other hand, her personality and her convictions come on strong. Her beliefs are not echoes of her husband, but the product of her own knowledge and feeling. She speaks for herself. Both women are clearly assets to their husbands. Neither can tip the scale, for it is, as always, the man who matters. This is Maria Manis.
In a moment, a preview of tomorrow's manned Apollo space launch at Cape Kennedy.
Millions of Americans lose half their teeth by age 35. Not from decay, but from gum problems that can start unnoticed at any age. That's why Playtex invented this new toothbrush, to help keep gums as strong as teeth. Most bristles are sharp like this, but each Playtex naturalized bristle is like a tiny brush. So you get hundreds of tiny brushes that not only clean teeth, but massage and exercise gums, for gums as strong as your teeth. New Playtex toothbrush.
You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier in a Playtex Cross Your Heart bra. Its secret? This Playtex shaping crosses your heart with stretch to lift and separate. You're suddenly shapelier in a Playtex Cross Your Heart bra. You'll see. Get one and pass the word. You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier.
At Cape Kennedy tonight, the countdown continues smoothly for tomorrow's launch, the first manned Apollo flight. There is a chance of showers tomorrow, and if it rains, there could be some delays. ABC science editor Jules Bergman reports from Cape Kennedy.
When the service tower rolls back at Pad 34 and Apollo 7 hurls into orbit, a new era opens for America's manned space program, the era of manned spaceflight to the moon. The Apollo spacecraft is bigger, roomier, and can do more things than any spacecraft ever flown by either Russia or America. Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walt Cunningham, the Apollo 7 crew, will ride into orbit on their 11-day flight sitting in these couches. But unlike any earlier spacecraft, they can get up and walk around up front here in the equipment bay area. And they can sleep under the couches in these sleeping bags or hammocks. Our ABC News Apollo mock-up is an exact replica of the 12 by 13-foot spacecraft our astronauts will be flying. Once each day, they'll send back live television pictures showing themselves and the Earth. No one's certain how good the quality will be. If they're worthwhile, you'll see them as they're actually transmitted from space. This is the flight that almost was 2 years ago, before the Apollo fire tragically took the lives of Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. A new fireproof Apollo spacecraft was built with a quick escape hatch. For nearly 2 years, thousands of people have drilled hard to make Apollo 7 succeed. And America's hopes ride high with Apollo 7. If it works, and there is high confidence here that it will, we'll fly men around the moon this December and have a good chance of landing on the moon before 1969 ends. If Apollo 7 doesn't work, then it'll take that much longer for us to get to the moon. This is Jules Bergman, ABC at Cape Kennedy.
ABC will televise the Apollo 7 launch tomorrow live beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The death toll among American troops in Vietnam last week, 190 men, was the lowest for any week in the past 2 months, a reflection of the decreased ground fighting. 1,316 Americans were wounded. 372 South Vietnamese troops were killed, and Allied sources estimate the enemy dead at 1,654. On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were down nearly 6.5 points. 17 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was down 21 cents. On the American Stock Exchange, nearly 7 million shares were traded. The American Exchange Index was down 12 cents. In a moment, the final game.
When the old machine just won't kick over, you need fuel, a special kind of high-powered fuel. Carnation Instant Breakfast with vitamin C, protein, minerals, food energy. Carnation Instant Breakfast. High-powered fuel for people.
Ready for dinner, darling? Got fish and chicken. Frisky's Buffet Fish and Chicken. Buffet always brings you home. Must be more than good eating. I'll bet it's something special that satisfies more than just your appetite. Is that it? I wouldn't dream of serving you anything but Frisky's Buffet anyway.
Frisky's Buffet cat food. 12 delicious dishes. Better for people who think better of cats.
Beer and champagne are flowing in St. Louis tonight, but in the visitors' locker room. ABC's Dave Dials reports from St. Louis.
This was a series that was not supposed to go 7 games, but even when it did, the odds were with Bob Gibson. After all, this was Gibson the Invincible, the man who had won 7 in a row in the Autumn Classic. Already he had whipped the upstart Tigers twice, and in the early innings he erased his own strikeout record, fanning his mound opponent, Mickey Lolich, in the 3rd. But this was Mickey's day. He beat Gibson 4-1, and after the game, he had this to say.
I never got tired in the game. I was weak almost from about the 3rd inning on. I didn't have the real good, hard fastball that I do know how to throw. As you notice, most of the balls today were hit on the ground. I was throwing a sinking fastball all day. I didn't have the good, hard fastball. I had fairly good control, not as good as I usually like, but I kept making the ball sink, and I got him out.
Pitching with just 2 days' rest, Lolich used more than just pitching to do the job. Twice he caught the Cardinal speed merchants napping. He picked Lou Brock off first after Brock had led off the 6th inning with a single. Same inning, Curt Flood at bat, a single to deep shortstop. Flood beats it out, but he too is caught leaning the wrong way. Brock and Flood, they had run the Tigers ragged, and their speed and Gibson's pitching were supposed to be enough. Even after these 2 setbacks, Gibson still was more than matching Lolich pitch for pitch. Now it's the 7th inning. Still no score. 2 outs. Gibson working on a 1-hitter. Cash singles. He's at second. Willie Horton singles. He's at first. Jim Northrup, the hitter. He's the man who specializes in grand slams, but this time a triple did the trick.
I hit the ball real good. I hit it hard and on a line, and it was a little bit to the left center of Flood, and I didn't know for sure if it'd get over his head because I know he plays deep, but I knew I'd hit it good and it had a chance, and when I see it go over his head, I was the happiest person alive right then. I am right now, too.
Curt Flood did not get a good jump on the ball. It went to the wall. Cash came across. So did Horton, and Gibson was not invincible after all. Bill Freehand with just 1 hit up now. Doubles to left center. The Tigers now lead 3-0. 3 singles in the 9th make it 4-0, and Lolich, the man who has already defeated the defending champions twice, is just 3 outs away. A homer by Shannon spoiled the shutout, but Lolich got the final out. Freehand on a pop fly, and the Tigers have their first World Series championship since 1945. Only their 3rd in 68 seasons. Lolich and the Tigers delirious. After all, they had been given up for dead. This was the greatest comeback of them all. Dave Dials, ABC News, St. Louis. And in Detroit, well, what did you expect?
Try a nice gefilte fish. Take pike, onions, carrots, and accent. Listen, you pay good money for food, right? So, accent wakes up the flavors you pay for. In gefilte fish, even Irish stew. Serve gefilte fish. And don't forget the accent. Accent wakes up old world flavor in gefilte fish. So enjoy.
Village Inn. Great new rice with a wild streak of flavor. Sturdy beef rice, hearty companion to Sunday roast. Herb rice, wisely seasoned. Or Spanish rice, bright with sweet red peppers. Put wild fancies into plain cookery. Village Inn. 7 great new rices with a wild streak of flavor. From Accent, the flavor people.
This is a molecular model of poly 1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate. How about that? And I'm Joanna Barnes here to tell you what this unique molecule of Codel polyester fiber means in carpets. It's so special, it's patented. Every room in your house comes alive because carpets of Codel bounce back beautifully. Even a house full of kids can't keep Codel fiber down. That's why Codel is the fastest growing carpet fiber. If you can't remember the name Codel, ask for poly 1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate.
We also make 2,2,4-trimethyl-1,3-pentane diol monoisobutyrate.
But that doesn't go in carpets.
Codel fiber has bounced back.
Count on Codel, a member of the Eastman Kodak family.
Just 100 years ago, the French impressionist Auguste Renoir did a canvas that he called Pont des Arts, Bridge of the Arts. Renoir sold the painting for the equivalent of $77. 77. But last night in New York's Park Burnett galleries, after some gentlemanly bidding, the very same painting was auctioned off for $1,550,000. Norton Simon, the industrialist and art collector, phoned in the winning bid from Los Angeles. $1,550,000 for the painting. Well, wait till he gets his phone bill. That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.
Monday through Friday in color. The ABC Evening News with Frank Reynolds. This has been a presentation of ABC News.